So, do we remember your story of the pediatrician?
Yes.
Okay.
I can't believe this is coming into a third episode on this podcast.
I know, but I promise you we're not going to go and bring up your side of things,
Okay.
but I
Okay.
have a slightly similar situation here. So I moved into a new apartment and I switched my location from where I was at before to a gym that's closer to me. And I would try to go at the same time every day. And I started to realize that there was this one guy who was fucking hot and he would always be there at the exact same time that I was there working out. And so then I found myself like having to pick my outfits out for the gym.
Uh-huh.
I have these pair of shorts, right? They're like workout shorts, but since I've been like really focusing on my glutes lately, they kind of have gotten like a little bit tighter.
All right.
And I have been avoiding them. But then I was like, you know what? I'm going to wear them. And
Thirst trap shorts?
just a little bit. So I go to the gym. Obviously, he's there. I'm like, perfect. I'm working out. You know, there's all the mirrors in the gym. So you're kind of like clocking to see if like he's looking at you. And then I go and start to do like my squats at the end of my workout. I have my AirPod Maxes in, which I can't hear anything. He starts to come over to me and I'm like, oh my God. Oh my God. And so I was like, what do I do? And I was like, I'm just going to keep working out. He taps me on my shoulder. I turn around. I'm like, hi. And he's like, hey, full on. Like I'm thinking I'm in like a rom-com movie. And he's like, hey, from like fellow workout gym buddy to fellow gym buddy, I just want to let you know that your shorts are split in the back. And I was like, he's like, I want to let you know. And I was like, cool. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. And so I went to the freaking bathroom and I look at my shorts and it is a full split down the middle. And I obviously didn't hear that my shorts split because I had my AirPods in. And I'm like, well, I'm never going to go work out at that time anymore because how embarrassing. But then I probably should have done like the thing of just like playing it off.
Did you or no?
No, I was mortified. I was absolutely mortified.
Did he laugh? At least laugh with you?
You know when you can feel your face like flaming hot red?
Yes.
My face was like on fire because I thought he was coming over to me to talk to me, but he only was telling me
and
that.
You poor thing, it's like as he's walking towards you, you're like imagining your whole life together. You're like, you're 10 years down in your imagination, and then he comes and tells you, he's like, you ripped your shorts.
Hey, just want to let you know, like, you're doing squats and your pants are split. How did I not feel the breeze? Don't listen to Lady Gaga's new album and have the volume all the way up because maybe you'll hear your pants rip. 3, 2,
Hi, Dee.
Hi, Dee. Before we start every episode, we like to share a vintage cocktail from my grandpa's little black book. All his own recipes from his days of owning a bar in Detroit in the 1940s.
So, Drew, tell us about our drink today from your grandpa's little black book.
Today's drink is called the South Sea Dipper, and this is made with rum, which I'm actually not a huge fan of, but it's 1.5 ounce of white rum, 1/4 ounce of fresh pineapple juice, 1/4 ounce of lime juice, and a little teaspoon of sugar, and you mix it into a shaker, pour it out, and I honestly really, really liked this one.
Are we ready to get into it?
Let's fucking do it! Hi, everyone! Welcome to the Forensic Files Duo podcast, where we recap, review, and provide updates on the cases featured on the true crime TV show Forensic Files. I'm Drew, and I knew nothing about true crime until we started this podcast.
And I'm Danielle, and true crime practically raised me.
If you're listening to us for the very first time and want to hear more about our friendship and how we became the forensics duo many moons ago, head over to episode 1 for the whole backstory. But to summarize, our high school had a forensics team, and we competed in the duo category.
It had absolutely nothing to do with science in the slightest. But as a duo, two people perform a scene from a play. We can't look at each other, touch each other, or use props outside of stools or chairs. Then you take it to competitions and you compete against other schools.
We were little drama kids with big dreams and also amazing chairs that were decorated to the max and were almost as iconic, if not more, than us. Now look at us hosting a true crime podcast for free.
Okay, now for our regular disclaimer. We understand that we will be discussing a lot of sensitive topics. Although we may laugh at times, please remember that we are laughing at ourselves and ourselves only. We are not making light of what the victims and their families have gone through and may continue to be going through.
And in an effort to use the public's overall interest in the show Forensic Files and leverage the power of digital media, once the episode coverage is over, we will highlight a missing persons case that we would like everyone to know about.
Today's episode is listed on Wikipedia as Season 1, Episode 8, called The Wilson Murder, and it aired on November 14th, 1996. And we're traveling to Huntsville, Alabama, and finally, we are in a town that I've been to.
And I've never been to.
Now I finally got one on you. So not only have I been to it, I booked my very first television commercial for the Huntsville airport.
Oh, work, Huntsville.
And that's why I fly HSV. It was my first time on TV, and I had 2 commercials running in the Southeast at the time. And oh boy, I felt like I had made it. I remember getting texts from people asking if it was me. And I was like, oh my God, it's the beginning of a career I have always dreamed of. I didn't book anything for another 2 years.
Life of showbiz.
According to Huntsville.org and pods.com, in 1992, Huntsville, Alabama was a city known for its connection to the space program and the U.S. Space and Rocket Center, drawing visitors and a growing economy fueled by technology and defense industries. It was actually called Rocket City due to its role in the development and testing of the Saturn V rocket, which launched the Apollo missions to the moon. Yeah, Huntsville's economy was experiencing growth driven by the technology and defense industries, including the presence of the Marshall Space Flight Center.
And I'm sure, as you all can guess what I'm about to say, by the 16th episode in the beginning of the show, what do you know? The reenactment is in boring black and white. Peter tells us that on the night of May 22nd, 1992.
Not to cut you off, but I need to make a freaking bingo card out of how many Forensics Files cases happen on my family's birthdays. May 22nd is my brother's birthday.
Oh, yeah, and then Blake's.
And then Blake's there's been 2 episodes happening. The case happened on Blake's birthday, my husband.
Oh,
and
my
this
God.
was actually my brother's 10th birthday, to be exact.
Stop.
Like, I need a bingo card. This is weird. Anyways,
Yeah.
I just had, I was like, this needs to stop. This needs to stop.
Or it's just all a sign, to be honest with you.
I don't know. It's weird. Anyways, go on.
On Danielle's brother's 10th birthday, we meet Betty Wilson, who returned home immediately after her Alcoholic Anonymous meeting, which I am not too sure yet at this point why we must know that she is struggling with addiction, but I'm hoping we will find out. Well, in true procrastinator form, which I am so guilty of doing this, so I feel you, Betty. Betty had some last-minute packing to do for a vacation that she was leaving for the following day with her husband. But as she was walking up the stairs and headed for her bedroom to relieve her last-minute packing guilt, she found her husband lying in a pool of blood. It was very clear that her husband, Jack Wilson, had been murdered. And we find out that actually experts couldn't agree on how he was murdered.
When we see a graphic that kind of looks like a cheap Microsoft PowerPoint image of the title's Wilson murder, with a picture of a baseball bat and the noise of a baseball bat dropping on the floor.
I don't know why this was a trigger for me.
It's a very distinct noise, though. The falling of a metal baseball bat is it's a tink tink. It's a very distinct noise. So I can understand why this would bring a memory out.
I don't know if it's because as we're doing this podcast, we're going back in time and we're reminiscing. But I just remember being so traumatized by baseball because after I was done with hockey, for a solid year, my parents were we're going to put Drew into every single sport. And when I tell you every single sport, I mean I did soccer, baseball, karate. I even did violin, everything. And baseball was so triggering for me because I lasted only 3 days, but they would not put me out into the field or whatever those positions are because I would just be sitting down playing with the dandelions. I was just so bored. They put me into the position where I had to catch the ball. And so I was right behind the position, right behind the pitcher. Yeah. And the guy hit the ball and it instantly flew right into my stomach and knocked the wind out of me. And I was so pissed that I got up, walked off the field mid-game, went to my dad and said, I am done. I don't want to play baseball anymore.
You know what? Good on you, little baby Drew, for speaking your truth.
But literally, I had the wind knocked out of me and I was like, I am done. I couldn't actually say this.
I could see it all. I could see it all happen. Okay, so we then hear an audio that comes directly from Betty saying,
I went up the steps, and as I rounded the top of the stairs with my head down and looking up to turn on the light, I saw Jack lying in the floor.
Finally, someone who reacts how I would react. Miriam from our last episode should have taken some notes because Betty decides to jump ship when she finds her husband murdered on the floor and leaves the house and then heads to a neighbor's where she calls 911.
Listen, this is the police department. Talk to me, okay? Were you in the house or did you walk in the house? Okay, you come home and you walked in the house and you saw this person laying on the floor. Who is the person to you? Okay, do you know Do you know if the person that hurt him is still inside? I don't know. I got to. Okay. Now you just go stand there and you don't go back to your house, okay? And we've got an ambulance and we've got the police on the way.
We learn that the Huntsville, Alabama police arrived at the murder scene within minutes of the call. Cue the entrance of private investigator Jerry McDaniel, and he tells us that upon arrival to the scene, it was very clear that Jack Wilson, who was lying in the hallway in a huge puddle of blood, had appeared to have been beaten badly and also stabbed. Peter finally decides to give us a tiny clue about the crime scene and the weapons used.
Lying next to the body, the apparent murder weapon, a 34-inch long metal baseball bat covered with blood. But police couldn't locate the weapon used to stab him.
These crime scene photos stopped me in my tracks. Like, I stopped breathing. I'm not kidding. Like, I brought my hands to my neck and literally clutched my imaginary pearls. I think it's the like soft Southern accents that are bringing out like that 5 years of me living in the South. But the way they show this poor man murdered,
I
like
know.
they show all of him, not just
All of
portions
him.
of the scene. You see the whole man in his own blood. We see it multiple times. And I know I say this every episode, but this one really, really horrified me.
Yeah.
And just like how sad for the sweet man's dignity. I got really emotional after seeing these photos. It's such a dichotomy because they show him so full of life. And then to see the contrast of the crime scene photos, I will truly never be able to forget them.
Yeah, I'm just like so surprised because we're going back to season 1.
Yeah.
I was genuinely confused because these are graphic
Really,
images and there
really
was
graphic.
no warning.
No.
There was no like warning. These images are maybe like traumatizing
Right.
or whatever
I think
they
there was
say.
less censorship then, which is weird, than there is now.
And they just keep showing them throughout the episode. And I was like, reminding me to never do my notes right before bed.
Same.
Because I was like,
Same.
"Ugh."
Same. In Jack Wilson's bedroom, the telephone line had been cut and a green ski mask was found on top of the bed. I am praying that we see them test this mask. They also found an open pistol box with ammunition, but no sign of the gun. As of now, there was no indication that the Wilson home was robbed. All the drawers were left untouched, emptied, and closets were all left untouched. And we get told that Jack Wilson's wallet was actually found on the floor near his shoes, and there was no cash inside the wallet, but all the credit cards were still inside. And this is sounding a lot like our last episode. A murderous wife, maybe, killing for money. I don't know. Kind of wondering if that's what's happening here, too, because man, 1992 and then 2008, more money, more problems.
At this point, we find out more info on who Jack Wilson is. He was a 55-year-old eye doctor who was very successful and well-known in his community. It is very touching to hear this next quote, which comes from Jerry McDaniel about Jack's career as an eye doctor.
I'd even hate to estimate how many people that Jack treated absolutely free because they needed medical help and they couldn't afford to pay.
Jack and Betty Wilson have been married for about 14 years. Both had 3 children from previous marriages. The words that his wife used to describe Jack was honestly so heartwarming, and then after hearing Jerry and Betty's description of Jack, you truly get painted the picture of how good of a man Jack was.
We were happy and satisfied with each other. He met every need that I or my children or my grandchildren had.
Now, remember what she says here in that sweet southern drawl. We were happy and we were satisfied with each other. Okay, because you just heard Miss Wilson lie, but we'll get back to that. As police began searching for clues, homicide detectives learned about a shocking piece of information. The county sheriff's office had received a tip just the day before. We learned that someone from the small town of Vincent, Alabama, said that she overheard a conversation that a man from that same town had been hired to kill a doctor. That information led police on a long, long journey from the backwoods of Alabama to one of its most popular neighborhoods. And I need to take a moment to say that this case is also covered on the show Snapped, and they show us this area and they tell us that it's actually called Pill Hill because there's so many doctors that live there. These homes, y'all, these southern mansions, sweet baby Jesus, they are so gorgeous. This neighborhood is how I kind of imagined the entire South to look before I moved there. That's not how it looks at all.
This ended with a long and bitter courtroom dispute because of there being 2 conflicting descriptions of what happened during Jack Wilson's last moments alive. After this courtroom extravaganza, we then see more disturbing yet surprising for 1992 crime scene photos again that give me the heebie-jeebies. I just can't get over it. The body of Jack Wilson was transported to the state medical examiner in Birmingham, Alabama for a routine autopsy. We then see more really gross photos from the autopsy of Jack and find out from Sir Dr. Joseph Embry that he noticed a series of lacerations on Wilson's head. Then cut to another gross picture that shows us Jack's fractured skull. Wilson had also suffered a fractured hyoid bone in his neck, and his fractured right shoulder had a puncture wound that was clearly visible. Both arms were fractured. These were defensive-type wounds, indicating Wilson tried to fend off his attack and fight for his life. And there were 2 stab wounds in his abdomen. Officially, the cause of death was listed as blunt force trauma to the head. But how do we know that he died specifically from blunt force? Because there were so many other horrible things that these people did to him. Like, how do we actually know?
That's a good question, Drew. They didn't cover this. And the answer is a forensics answer. It's basically, they can tell how, like, blood, if you still have blood running through your veins, the injury will produce differently. So if the heart is still pumping blood, it shows, you know, how this injury is made, or if the blood is not circulating anymore, it shows up other ways in the body. I know that's not like a super scientific answer. Those medical examiners should be able to tell. Here's a good example. It's like when you drown. You're dead before, you're not going to have water in your lungs. If you die from drowning, you're going to have water in your lungs.
Got it.
So it's kind of like that same thing. They do have ways to figure out like what injuries happened post-mortem and while you were still alive.
Yeah, I mean, like, obviously, if he only had the blunt force to the head, I wouldn't be questioning that. But he had, like, multiple things that happened to him that I was like, how do we know?
I know. And sometimes it is hard. Sometimes it is hard. But this one, the medical examiners who speak on this case, it does get very muddy. It's very confusing. So the Huntsville Police Serology Lab identified the blood that was found on the bat was the same blood type as Jack Wilson, but they didn't find any fingerprints. After this, the police turned to the information that they received before the murder. We then hear from an interview from who I think is involved as a detective say,
"We had a concerned citizen in the county that overheard a conversation that Mr. White had stated that he was going to Huntsville over the weekend to kill someone."
Huntsville police drove about 100 miles to Vincent, Alabama, which in my opinion is actually very far to interview this next person, who is James White, because he is coming from the tip from someone overhearing about what he said he was going to do, which was kill a doctor. James lived in a trailer on the outskirts of town. We learned that he was a handyman at the Vincent Elementary School where his own children attended, which also truly sends chills down my spine after finding out what kind of basket case this man was. But I don't know if this is the right timing to say this.
What?
But do you remember that I definitely, in high school, had a crazy ex-boyfriend named James White?
I totally forgot about him.
Do you remember him?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was the one that like lit when I was like 16 years old, lied to me, and this is when MySpace was around, and like he told me he was 18, and then I find out that on his MySpace, like people were saying like happy 24th birthday.
I didn't know that's how you found out.
And that's how I found out that he was like lying to me that he was 24 years old dating a 16-year-old boy.
Oh, Drew.
Start of my gay journey.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I forgot about
Crazy.
him. Wow.
We then find out that Betty Wilson was actually a twin. Something I feel like that we should have probably led with in the beginning of the episode. I mean, come on, Forensic Files.
They did.
They did?
Yeah. But okay, to be fair, it's in a tiny little box under her name. And I actually missed it the first 2 times too when I watched the episode.
Oh, come on. Well,
I was like really confused why Betty was being interviewed in different outfits and in like different locations
same.
with completely different hair and makeup. Because they're fraternal twins. They're not identical, but they look enough alike that like with hair and makeup changes, you'd be like,
oh my God. Anyways, we see a photo of Betty's twin, Peggy Lowe. And after seeing this photo of her, it was giving true scary movie mugshot vibes.
100%.
She was a first grade teacher at the same school that James White worked at. We then get told that James White had a history of drug and alcohol abuse, a past criminal record, and was dishonorably discharged from the military. And then you let him work at an elementary school? Come on.
That's ridiculous.
Police interrogated White for hours, and he admitted being inside the Wilson home the night of the murder. We were then dropped with this eerily confident quote from James White himself.
I've been drinking for the last 3 or 4 days, popping pills, drinking, smoking dope. And all I knew is I wanted to get away. They say the man got beat with a baseball bat, but I don't remember a baseball bat being around nowhere. But I do remember that I hit the man. He turned me loose.
Honestly, he sounds so horrible that he sounds truthful. Like, because he's
Right.
not making himself look good at all. So I do want to believe him, because then we go right to Betty Wilson's interview and how they treated her in prison. And they did her no justice by picking this clip.
Mm-hmm.
The police came, they jerked me around, they jerked my watch off of my arm and threw it across the room, saying, "You won't need this where you're going."
Okay, but I will say, I had to go back to my notes and re-edit after I did some research because I wasn't quite fair, because I have heard all different sides of this case now at this point. And I was very, very influenced by this episode and how they present Betty, that I did not like her at all. I will say how they put this clip in here, I don't think it's quite fair. I found out that she spent 9 months in solitary confinement before her pretrial. And that's just cruel. I mean,
Whoa.
solitary confinement, from what I've read, is horrible.
It's like a little hole with no windows, and it's like
And it's just really cruel to do to someone who hasn't been convicted yet. Let's remember, like, this is before her pretrial.
Right.
So anyways, I just wanted to state that, and I would like everyone to have that kind of view going through this, to try not to be so influenced by what you're being presented, because that does make a big impact of like
Right.
the opinions we form. It sure did on me while I was watching this. Like, I was like, fuck her.
Right.
you
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
like-
same.
And then I heard some other context of it, and I'm like, ooh, I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't know. I definitely don't envy the jury here. Okay, so anyways, before police returned to Huntsville, they searched White's trailer, and inside they found a pair of shoes with a blood stain, which later matched Jack Wilson's blood type. There's no DNA match yet, or I don't know if there will be. But you know, I'm over here like praying that they're going to actually test this, right? Because it's 1992. I'm starting to get all the dates mixed up. Like, we had DNA,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
It was 80s.
Yeah.
It was the
Yeah.
80s. Yeah. So I'm praying that they will, but spoiler, they don't. There is no DNA testing that happens. There still hasn't been. So that's just lost in the wind, I guess. I don't know. So then in the abandoned house next door, police discover a revolver, which was registered to Betty Wilson. And remember, they found that gun box, an empty gun box with just ammunition in it. And then in James White's truck, a book of poetry from the Huntsville Public Library, which had been signed out by Betty Wilson. Police arrested James White and charged him in the murder of Jack Wilson. Then a shocking disclosure. James White told police that Betty Wilson and her twin sister Peggy Lowe had hired him to kill Jack Wilson for money. Betty Wilson and Peggy Lowe were immediately picked up for questioning.
As police looked for a motive, there were some rumors that came to light about the unconventional relationship between Betty and Jack. They lived very separate lives in very separate bedrooms, which, in no surprise, that we find out that there was little to no sex happening at all, which I feel like we could have left that out because anyone would automatically assume that after hearing all of the rest of the details of their relationship. But anyways, Betty also admitted to the police that she was living her best life because during their marriage, she had multiple affairs.
And here's where I start getting super emotional for Sweet Jack. I really, really hate how this episode just plasters his murdered body all over without any respect for him. This poor man suffered from Crohn's disease, which is horrible. And I imagine in the early 90s that treatment options weren't anywhere near to what they are today because he had to wear an ostomy bag, which Betty admitted to friends she found repulsive. She called it actually the shit bag. I heard that in other sources. Yeah, and I just think that's so cruel.
really
I think
mean.
it's so cruel. This is truly when I started to actually buy into the hate Betty parade. But then we hear that perhaps the strongest motive of all was the fact that Betty Wilson would have received the bulk of her husband's $6 million estate. More on that later. So the star witness in Betty's trial was James White because without him, there is literally no case against the sisters. And we find out James actually cut a deal with prosecution. He would implicate Betty Wilson and Peggy Lowe in return for a reduced sentence.
The sisters ended up being tried separately, and I'm sure in true twin fashion, there was probably a little fight between who should be tried first, but Peggy won and Betty had to go first. According to James White's testimony and the prosecution's, here is the interpretation of the autopsy findings.
James White entered the Wilsons' home.
He waited in one of the upstairs bedrooms.
Jack Wilson arrived home around 5 p.m.
Neighbors saw him step out to the front yard to hammer a campaign poster into the lawn with a baseball bat.
He then walked back inside the house and headed upstairs to his bedroom.
Then, according to James White, he changed his mind and decided not to murder Wilson.
But as he was leaving, he encountered him in the hallway and the two struggled.
White grabbed the baseball bat and struck Wilson in the head.
He was then stabbed twice in the abdomen.
James said Betty met him outside and drove him to his truck.
However, police experts found no evidence of White's hair, clothing fibers, or even a fingerprint inside Betty Wilson's car. Okay, so lacking any strong physical evidence, the prosecution attacked Betty Wilson's character. And to do this, they subpoenaed one of her ex-lovers. Actually, they subpoenaed a couple, but there was one in particular that they subpoenaed from California to testify about their adulterous relationship. And this is where I have to add a little bit more context from my research, and I'm going to do that right now. There was a documentary that came out about this case. I rented it on Prime. It's very independent, very much like self-produced, but it's good context to have. But in the documentary, it claims that the Alabama jury was unduly influenced by the fact that Betty Wilson, a white woman, had a sexual affair with a black man. The doc as a whole explores the racial overtones in the trial. It's a really interesting documentary that opens up with a mom just pouring her heart out about her son, and she is so proud of him. I think it's adorable. But then the son, who is the inspiration of this entire documentary, he says that he was binge watching Forensic Files episodes and watched this episode, and that is when he felt compelled to investigate it further, which I thought was cool.
And I'm sorry, but did you see Betty Wilson's court outfit?
Yes, I thought the same thing.
It was giving Cher from Clueless 100%. I was like, okay, Betty.
Yep.
Anyways, the jury found Betty Wilson guilty of capital murder, and she was then sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. We then hear how attorney Charles Hooper tells us how he feels about why Betty Wilson was convicted.
I think Miss Wilson was convicted on her personal conduct. She couldn't have been convicted on the evidence. I mean, the physical evidence was not there to support it.
Honestly, Charlie, you're not wrong.
The prosecution's next task was to try Betty Wilson's twin sister, Peggy Lowe, for the same crime. But, in my opinion, she should probably just get the same sentence, since in both trials the evidence and witnesses would be the same. And Peggy Lowe did not have as fierce of an outfit as her twin sister, Betty. I mean, it's blah. It's like a plain beige.
So what police hadn't prepared for was the testimony of a defense expert that would drop a forensic bombshell. And that bombshell was that Jack Wilson was not murdered in the same way the prosecution said. 8 months after Betty Wilson was convicted of murder for hire, her twin sister Peggy Lowe goes on trial for the same crime. But this time, the prosecution couldn't attack the defendant's lifestyle. Oh, because she was everything a little lady is told to be in her debutante ball classes.
Miss Peggy Lowe, please tell us why you are the Lord's favorite.
Well, first, I am a first-grade school teacher. My husband is a preacher, so praise be those taxes on for thee. And I am even the lead singer with the church choir, so Jesus hears me louder than the others. Peggy Lowe's attorneys had time to look for new evidence and to go over the testimony from her sister's trial. One of the things they noticed was that James White never actually admitted to killing Jack Wilson.
We then tried to understand the response from James White in this moment, and I had to go back and listen twice before turning on subtitles because this was really hard. And this is the first time I think I've ever had to do that with an American accent on the screen. I've never had to do that before.
The detectives told me that I hit him with a baseball bat or I had to hit him with something other heavy. And I think I told them that I kept reaching until I got something other, and I hit the man and he turned me loose and I left.
There were just a few things that bothered the defense team. One of the biggest being the crime scene, because how could a man be beat so badly with a metal baseball bat, which caused him to have 2 broken arms, stab wounds, and his head be beaten so badly that there were no blood spatter patterns at all?
I agree. So the defense took the autopsy report and crime scene photos to Georgia and showed them to the Atlanta's deputy medical examiner. But then we see them too. I legitimately had a nightmare about this one photo. I'm not trying to exaggerate here, you guys. Seeing him, you see his whole body on the autopsy table. And it is not something that the general public is equipped to experience.
Right.
I'm sorry. Anyways, we're told that if someone is being struck with a blunt instrument to cause lacerations, like the ones Jack had, there's going to be a spray of blood. And that's not only sprayed when the instrument strikes the head or strikes the arm, but also as the instrument raises back. There's going to be a spray pattern that would go upwards onto the wall, or onto the ceiling and then coming back down. This is actually a true crime class that we have definitely covered. And although some aspects of blood spatter analysis can be considered unreliable nowadays, the physics aspect of that is pretty reliable. And the motion of hitting someone with a bat that violently to produce that much blood and that much damage would require a certain pattern of blood spatter, but there wasn't any significant spray pattern at all, like at all. Dr. Sperry agreed to testify at Peggy Lowe's trial, and James White once again told his story, but this time he was severely challenged by the defense. Then Peggy's defense attorney, David Johnson, comes in hot with some wild accusations.
The man is a liar, a child molester, shot his own men in Vietnam. He's been on psychedelic drugs. He's a drunk. He's a dope addict. He's a cocaine user.
My first question is, I may be asking this and should probably know the answer since we're back in the 90s, but where is the luminol?
Well, there was no evidence of a cleanup or signs of like trying to conceal a crime scene, so they didn't need it.
Oh.
Because luminol, remember, is only used when looking for evidence of a cleanup because it reacts with blood and also household cleaning products like the bleach. So it's used when they don't see blood with the naked eye.
Okay.
But they want to see if there's evidence of blood once being cleaned up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that
and
makes
this
sense.
doesn't show any signs of like, why would they just clean the walls and then leave everything else right there?
Right, okay. The other strong defense challenge that came against the state medical examiner was who did the autopsy. None of this made sense to anyone because not only did it not make physical sense, but it didn't make scientific sense. Because this is where I hope that halfway through this episode that we will actually find out that forensic evidence can solve this case. But then what the most startling testimony was from Dr. Chris Sperry, and he says,
one instrument of any sort is used to strike the head repeatedly. It is very, very common. In fact, with repeated blows, almost always you will have not only transfer of blood from the lacerations onto the instrument, but hair as well.
He also tells us that hair embedded in blood that's on the surface of a blunt instrument like a metal baseball bat is crucial, but there was no hair that he knew of that was found on the bat or the skull of Jack. But all they did was the blood typing on the bat from the crime scene.
But Dr. Sperry went even further, saying he doubted that the bat was the murder weapon at all, and James White never admitted to using the bat. But let's remember, this man took all the drugs and drank all the beers. I saw on something else that they estimated his blood alcohol content was like 0.43 if he had like drank as many beers as he claimed he did. Yeah, they did like the math with his weight and everything. So he says he doesn't remember anything further happening, but then is certain about other things that would incriminate him. You can't have it both ways. Well, Dr. Sperry says a lot in this next section. It's a lot of words. And it's a lot of him rambling. But to get to the facts is a baseball bat causes crushing type injuries. And Jack Wilson had an injury pattern with lacerations and fractures beneath the lacerations. The linear patterns of the wounds to his scalp led Dr. Sperry to conclude that it was more than likely a fireplace poker that was used on Jack Wilson. This also explains the puncture wound found on Dr. Wilson's shoulder.
This was rather unusual in and of itself, and no one really had an explanation for that particular injury.
I can't help but honestly feel so sick to my stomach when they keep showing these goddamn photos.
I know, it's like they get worse and worse every episode. And I'm like, I know I'm a broken record.
No, I mean, I feel like I'm a broken record. It is so gross. Okay, after they said fire poker, and you think of how a fire poker is shaped, and from the disgusting photos that they keep showing, specifically of the laceration on his back, you see a U-shaped bruise. And usually fire pokers have that like end of it where it's like a circle and then the poker at the bottom. And with this new hypothetical scenario, suddenly this makes a lot of sense, even to me, because with this suggestion, this makes the whole pattern fit. The autopsy report indicated that Jack Wilson's hyoid bone had been fractured, and remember, Sperry also believed he was strangled. I found it frustrating that when the prosecutor decided to say,
it didn't make a damn how Dr. Wilson got killed. The question was, who did it? And James White admitted to doing it, whether he stomped him, beat him with a bat, beat him with a stick. But that's the type of bull
that experts try and sell to juries.
Yeah, I remember this part.
Oh my gosh.
I remember this. And this
Yeah.
goes back to something I say almost every episode when a prosecutor is like, they got their justice even if it was weak evidence. It's like, no. It does matter.
Right.
It does matter
Right. It
what
does
the
matter.
evidence is if you're going to convict someone and take all their liberties and freedom away.
Yeah, I mean, it's crucial to know how he got killed to indicate who the killer was. I mean, I think it's just absolutely bonkers. But we learn of a new theory.
Neighbors saw him on the front lawn around 5 p.m., hammering the political poster into the ground with a baseball bat.
He was then attacked by at least 2 individuals.
During the struggle, Wilson's hyoid bone was fractured,
He was struck at least 9 times in the head and at least once in his shoulder.
creating the puncture wound in the back of his neck, then stabbed twice in the abdomen.
The body was then placed in a tarp and carried into the house, dropped onto the wooden floor, and then turned 180 degrees.
His head brushed against the doorway molding, leaving a blood stain and the swirling blood pattern on the floor.
They smeared blood onto the bat so it would look like the murder weapon. They took the fireplace poker and knife and fled. In my opinion, this is actually ridiculous.
Absolutely.
Because I feel like this episode has so many plot holes in it, like the twins, the James White connection to Peggy, and the twins hiring James to kill Jack for $5,000. And now all of a sudden the bat not even being the murder weapon at all.
I know. So whether you believe that it's important to know what killed Dr. Wilson or not, because the prosecutor apparently doesn't believe that's important, the issue really was, did Betty Wilson and Peggy conspire with James White to kill Jack Wilson? So that trash of a prosecutor and what he says, I cannot get over it, because it is an issue of what killed Dr. Wilson, because then if this whole case is based on someone's confession, you need to line things up. And if he's getting murder weapons wrong and stuff like that, then he's no longer a reliable witness to testify in their case. I'm appalled that this prosecutor would say something like that. But anyways, to convict Peggy Lowe, the jury would have to believe James White. And if Dr. Sperry was correct, the murder didn't happen the way James White said. So now there are 2 scenarios as to how Jack Wilson was murdered.
Neighbors saw him in the front of the lawn around 5 p.m. hammering the political poster into the ground with a baseball
Using
bat.
Dr. Sperry's interpretation, he was then attacked by at least 2 individuals.
During the struggle, Wilson's hyoid bone
He was struck
fractured,
at least 9 times in the head,
and at least once in the
creating
shoulder,
the puncture wound in the back of his neck.
then stabbed twice in the
The
abdomen.
body was then placed in a tarp.
And carried into the house, dropped onto the wooden floor, and then turned 180 degrees.
His head brushed against the doorway molding.
Leaving a bloodstain and the swirling blood pattern
They
on the
smeared
floor.
blood onto the bat so it would look like the murder weapon.
Took the fireplace poker and knife and fled. Do you not see the problem with this reenactment? I mean, we learned at the beginning of the episode that there were no fingerprints on the bat. But in this reenactment, it shows that the murderers lifted up Jack's head and then obtained blood from the body and smeared it with their bare hands on the bat. Wouldn't that leave some fingerprints to collect? I don't know. But we find out that the jury deliberated less than only 2 hours and they found that Peggy was not guilty.
People thought that she had gotten a guilty verdict, but they were tears of joy and relief.
But the true question is, at this point, is how could Dr. Sperry and Embry have such different conclusions of what happened? Well, they asked 2 board-certified forensic pathologists to review the autopsy report as well as the crime scene photographs.
They both agreed the autopsy Dr. Embry performed was flawless. It just wasn't enough. Forensic science begins at the crime scene, and the fact that the police and the prosecution never showed Dr. Embry the bat or the crime scene photographs until just a few days before the first trial was a serious mistake. Both experts suggested that a thorough forensic examination of the crime scene might have revealed the cause of the puncture wound on Wilson's shoulder, but the 2 experts disagreed about the bat. One was bothered by the length of Jack Wilson's hair on it, and the other wasn't bothered by that. Dr. Walter Hoffman feels the lack of a thorough forensic crime scene investigation opened the door up for the defense. We then hear,
if the law enforcement agency doesn't ask for help and does it all on its own and then ships the body in for autopsy, a certain vital amount of information has been lost. You lose the ability to really evaluate the scene as it is found in a virginal state before anyone has walked around it and done anything with it.
Dr. Embry, who performed the autopsy on Jack, actually never visited the crime scene. Although he stands by his findings, it turns out he pleaded the fifth, declines the opportunity to defend what those findings were for forensic files, which in my opinion shows he's probably feeling like he's in the wrong here. After Peggy Lowe's trial, James White decided he wanted to change his confession. In a signed affidavit, he said he never met or even spoke with Betty Wilson, and that he was never propositioned by Peggy Lowe to murder Dr. Jack Wilson, and that he made it all up. I'm sorry, what? But then he goes on to say he was coerced into signing that previous statement and now has gone back to his original version of the story. This got me all sorts of confused because it was just like a back and forth. I mean, James needs to stick to something, right? James White remains in an Alabama prison. He tells us that he pleaded guilty to the case but didn't kill Jack. But he feels that he's in prison for knowing about what happened. It seems like James needs some therapy on understanding the more back and forth you go, the guiltier you sound, and everyone believes he probably would have sold his soul to avoid the electric chair.
2 sisters, 2 trials, the same forensic evidence, yet 2 different verdicts.
At the time of this show airing, Betty Wilson had been in prison for the last 4 years, serving a life sentence with no chance of parole. Peggy Lowe is here now saying,
"There's nobody there who cares anything about her. There's nobody to put their arms around her. There's nowhere for her to cry. There's no privacy. And the more things like that I realize, the more pain I feel for her."
The episode ends with Betty, and we don't like to end these episodes giving the murderers the last word, but I will go right into our updates and additional information. So this case actually kicked off the true crime show called Snapped. It's on Oxygen. It was the pilot episode that never aired in 2004, was the case of Jack Wilson's murder. And in 2023, they actually put a whole new episode together on the case, and you see clips from the pilot episode. And I just want to mention that every single other show that covers this case blurred out Jack when showing the crime scene photos. Now, earlier I mentioned that documentary. The documentary does make a compelling argument for Betty. I don't know what to believe after watching it. It contains a lot of recorded phone calls with Betty and the filmmaker, and I just feel like it brings a lot of context to how messy this entire case was. So apparently James White also has some mental health issues that I'm not sure if they're like officially diagnosed, so I'm not going to really go into that detail. He apparently claimed he had an affair with Peggy. I saw in the Snapped episode that James apparently got to know Peggy at their job at the school, and that he did some cabinetry work at her home. She apparently felt compelled to help him with his struggle with addiction because of how she saw her sister get into a place of recovery. We didn't talk a lot about the AA. I know you mentioned it earlier in the beginning of the episode, but she was very, very dedicated to her recovery. So when Peggy saw James struggling with the same thing, she felt compelled by God, whatever she felt compelled by, to help this man out. But he really took advantage of that. He would turn to her all the time when he was having thoughts of self-harm. He'd call her when he was spiraling. I'm kind of thinking he had some sort of infatuation with her. And so Peggy really did help him try to like get new jobs around town with his handyman work, his carpentry experience. And that's kind of how all 3 of them come together, is because Peggy recommended him, James, to do work in her house. And Betty claims that they were all set up for him to come and see what he was supposed to do, to give him a quote, yada, 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 but he never showed. Then there's also the fact that James got so much wrong in the interrogations when they were interrogating him that he was like saying that it was this murder weapon. It was that nothing he said lined up with the truth of what actually happened. It kind of seems like the police steered him in a certain direction to make a certain confession. And that's what a lot of people have. If they're on the side of, they're innocent, they've gone back to that, of that it was like a coerced confession. We heard Peggy's lawyer make some very, very horrific claims, remember, and accusations about James. And he was questioned about raping his 10-year-old daughter. And apparently his excuse was, "I was drunk." And according to that documentary, he is also accused of raping an inmate in prison. Then I want to bring up the man Betty had one of her affairs with. And the first question on cross-examination that he was asked was, "Mr. Fitzgerald, are you an African American?" He says, "Yes, I am." The next question was, "Mr. Fitzgerald, are you offended that Jimmy Fry," this is the prosecutor, "that Jimmy Fry subpoenaed you all the way from California to show the jury that you are in fact an African American?" Jimmy Fry objects to the questioning, and then the defense then dismisses the witness. Then Betty tells us that Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where her trial was held, is home of the Ku Klux Klan. I did double check that, and although the KKK has a deep history in this area of Alabama, the KKK was actually founded in Pulaski, Tennessee in 1865. Also, fuck them. Anyways, there was no money officially ever traced of this exchange that was supposed to happen. They couldn't find it in bank statements. They couldn't find this big chunk of money being present in his life that he was supposedly paid to kill James, and that was $5,000. What also wasn't mentioned in this show is that a life insurance policy to increase Jack Wilson's policy was never signed by Betty, which you would think if she was planning a murder, she would be like very on top of that. But it was Jack who initiated it. And not to mention, there was like no talk of divorce. He was not filing. There was nothing really to be motive for this. I guess, though, you could look at it both ways. Then we talk about the fact that there was no evidence in the black BMW of Betty's. And that's James saying that he went into her car and Betty was like the getaway driver. No evidence was found of him ever being in there. Betty also claims that after like 3 years of marriage, Betty was suffocating him. And he said, go and do your own thing. My patience will always come first. And that's apparently what triggered her drinking. And I just feel so confused as I keep talking about all of this. I think at the end of the day, there was not enough evidence to convict Betty. That's my personal opinion. If I was on a jury, I'd probably be the one that held out and then it was a hung jury because I don't think I could convict on what is provided here. The evidence that was found in James's home does connect him to the murder, but that's about as far as it goes because then on the other end of it, I think of our last episode where Miriam Helmick kills her husband, Alan, and in the snapped episode, it said that like Betty proved her alibi by pulling out receipts out of her purse. My jaw hit the floor because on the snapped episode, this is exactly what Betty did. She had him in her purse and she's just whipping out the receipts. And I had this moment where I was like, oh my gosh, did Miriam ever see this episode before she killed Alan? So now let's kind of flip it on its head and go to another resource. So there's a great podcast called Southern Fried True Crime, and they presented more about the trial than I could find. Apparently, for those big pieces of evidence like the gun and the money, there were corroborating witnesses. A teller at the bank testified that he made a big deposit and kept $1,000 in cash. And that's James' story, is that he kept it and used it for his kids, doing something with his kids. Then the way Betty was supposedly accused of giving a poetry book that she took out of a library, and that's where she put like the money as like a down payment and saying that you'll get the rest after you kill him. She handed it to a security guard who then gave it to James White. So that doesn't help, right? But then there was another witness that was from the hotel, and this witness said that he saw James at the hotel having a mental crisis, saying, she's going to pay for what she did to me. And a person at a local shop said James and another man came in to try to get more handyman work while they were there. So that's where that second person theory comes in, with that alternative theory that in Peggy's case that they presented. I think they went a little bit too far with that theory, but hey, it worked for Peggy. It gave them all enough reasonable doubt to acquit her. Betty also had a previous friend testify. This witness said that Betty told her she'd rather be a widow than a divorcee, but that doesn't make sense because she was already a divorcee. She had 3 kids with her first husband. The documentary also mentions that Betty was a registered nurse, and she probably could have killed him in a less obvious way because of his Crohn's disease, versus going through this, hiring an unstable mess of a man that was James White. Here's my theory. I think that James got her address and tried robbing the home. I think he stole the gun, because we learned even in our last episode that people take firearms, remember? He took cash to get out of there real quick, and maybe he grabbed like a random book. He found all these drugs and alcohol, like who knows what he found fascinating. I had someone steal like a paperweight from Blake and I's house before, a paperweight. And so maybe he grabbed a random bag, or maybe he just saw the book and was like, I want it. I don't know. So here's the documentary's theory. Jack Wilson was a super prominent doctor in Alabama, and I personally believe James murdered him. They're not quite clear of what they believe, but when this all went down, they think that Huntsville, Alabama was trying to make an example of Betty Wilson. Here's a white woman whose prominent white husband couldn't perform, so she goes out and seeks elsewhere and has an affair with a black man. And that's kind of what they were talking about, is that they had to make an example out of her. That's not acceptable in this society. And so they were trying to tie it back to Betty as much as possible and make it very clear to that society of like, we do not allow that kind of behavior here. So you're going to be punished. Whether you really did it or not, they're going to link it as much as they can because of how much they hate her and the lifestyle that she chose.
That is wild. I did not know that was going to be our update. Now for our missing persons case we would like everyone to know about. From the Missing Indigenous Relative Colorado's Instagram is the case of Vincent Vicente. Vincent was a resident at Mine Springs Health in Grand Junction, Colorado. On April 4th, 2024, he walked away from the Mine Springs facility. Vincent is an at-risk adult who may be suffering from mental health issues. His height is 5'8". He weighs about 125 pounds. His age is 31. His hair is brown. His eyes are brown. And he was last seen on April 4th, 2024. If seen or found, or you have any information, you're asked to please call Detective Hannah Benson at the Grand Junction Police Department at 1-970-549-5000, case number 2416291.
We will also post the case information on our Instagram at Forensic Files Podcast, but please first go and follow Black and Missing FDN and MMI Who is Missing on Instagram. Thank you. Our next episode is season 14, episode 15, titled Trail of a Killer. Sounds like a scary one.
Which I'm so excited about. Oh, Lord. If you like our podcast, please help us spread the word. Share on social media, share on Reddit, share everywhere, and drop us a review and tell us what you think.
Until the next one. Bye. Holland. Okay, you have to be quiet. Very quiet, okay? Okay. The issue was, did Betty Wilson and Peggy Lowe conspire with James White? I'm trying so hard. Spring break. Husband out of town all week. Go play with Oliver. What? Oliver's playing a recorder. Oliver! Why don't you guys just go watch Bluey for a little bit longer, okay? Or turn on... Okay. Please don't do that. It's getting the dog all hyped up. Just, you can do it when I'm done. Hi, sweetie. Okay. Wait, you shut the gate with you on the other side? I'm upstairs. Can you hear them? Can you hear them? Oh my God, stop playing the recorder. My dog's now crying. Everyone's crying. So the issue was... No! Lord, grant me the strength to accept the things I cannot change.